Bryce, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, well, I am, some people from the audience might recognize me. I used to do a YouTube show called The Bryce is Right. May go back to it. And also, I was a co-host on a Secular Soapbox, but I am a atheist, deconverted from Christianity about 5 years ago. And ever since then, I've been kind of curious to discuss different belief systems and why people believe what they do. But I also get into other topics dealing with, race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and things, these different social constructs and social ideas that kind of divide people. I like talking about morality and society and promoting humanism pretty much. Other than that, my personal, I'm a retired Air Force veteran, so some people might be curious about that. And I just, well, not just, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, but I'm about to graduate. I'm about to complete my master's in business. So that's pretty much what I've been doing. Thanks.
Awesome. So yeah.
Other than that, I'm not too interesting.
So what have you been up to lately? Haven't seen you in a while in the online scene.
Yeah, I've been taking a break. Like I said, it's been a while since I've done one of these podcast type shows. I had to take a break, mostly for mental health reasons, and and also just trying to complete school. It started to interfere a little bit. I've moved around a lot recently, different places around the world. So my schedule has been weird, but mostly just taking a break just to concentrate on my own mental health. And it's been good. It was good that I did that. I actually had to break from social media together, but I've now come back. I'm back on Facebook and I'm monitoring Twitter, but not participating too much.
Yeah, I don't think social media is the most conducive to healthy mental health status. I can attest as someone who does that professionally. So where have you been traveling?
Yeah.
You said you've been traveling a lot?
Yeah, so I just got back from Spain. So I'm married to a military member who's stationed in Spain right now, and so I was, but it's an unaccompanied tour visiting. It was an extended, but technically not living there. But I was there for a few months, and now I'm back in the States. I'm in Philly right now. We recently moved from California to Spain and Philly, and so yeah, pretty much California, Philadelphia, Spain. I think I should be going the other way.
Nice. How was Spain?
It's not. I mean, it's nice. It's an interesting experience living in Europe, because you get to see all of the cultural differences, the things that are very different between living in a European country versus the United States. Things that are better, some things that are worse. So it's an interesting cultural perspective. One thing I experiencing a different culture really kind of reaffirms this idea that morality and ethics and the way that people conceive of the world is really very different and very dependent on the society that you grow up in or experience or are around. People have these very different ideas, and it's not to say that one is better or worse. It's just it's different, and I think more people should travel abroad and experience different cultures before they decide what is or isn't moral or ethically correct, because it does change your perspective.
As a moral realist, I tend to think that mine is the right one.
I think we've discussed this before, because we've had a conversation before, but it was a couple of years ago.
We've had like 3 or 4, because we both co-hosted, I think, on a few shows, and
yeah,
I think
that's
you
right.
hosted a debate between a few.
I have a terrible memory, Tom, so forgive me if I don't remember any of those. I do remember meeting you, and I do remember talking about morality, and I remember that that's probably the one area where you and I differ in terms of our thought process. We're more alike in most other ways, so that was really kind of the only interesting area where we could even have some sort of debate. But yeah, that'd be something cool to talk about again in the future for sure. And
Yeah,
hi
definitely.
everybody in the chat as well. I just looked over and saw people talking.
Yeah. Not much chatter today because it's early in the morning and it's a
Yes.
Tuesday. Uh, yeah, so I recently signed a lawyer because I'm trying to apply for 501c3 status because I'm starting an atheist church based on my morality. I want to try to build a church organization that does what I think religious churches should be doing. The
Mhm.
goal is to provide affordable housing. So we want to get like housing units and try to rent them out at affordable rates. And that would be one of the goals of the church. And then we can use that income to fund church activities and do debates and conversations and host regular secular church activities, speeches and lectures, and speak like have the big atheist guys come down.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, so many questions jump out at that. For me, is one raising the question: why don't churches do this in the first place? Like, why don't more churches do this? You just said you want to start an atheist church to do what the Christian churches are not doing, but why aren't they doing it?
Because they're
Is
more
there a good
concerned with your
answer?
afterlife. Well, they're more concerned with your afterlife and your soul, and the prosperity gospel is more about making money anyway. So most
Yeah.
Christian churches have a proclivity to focus on more what their holy book says rather than what they should be doing to promote human life and growth. And so it's very rare that you get churches that are actually doing what they should be doing and helping people in the neighborhood. There's a few Christian churches in my area who are doing this, who do have affordable housing for people. And so my model is actually based on theirs, but it's very, very rare. Like if the prosperity gospel was actually buying houses for people, the housing crisis in America would look completely differently. So most churches are more focused on buying big crosses to put up on a pedestal rather than providing housing or food for people. And they just do that because kind of like an offshoot, occasionally do some community service stuff instead, and then just mostly focus on the worshiping of the Jesus.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic to me when you say it that way, because focusing your efforts on putting up crosses almost seems like a form of idolatry. And if they were really concerned with following the teachings of their book, I'm pretty sure it was Jesus who allegedly said, "Give to the needy, provide for the poor," all of this stuff. So you think that if they even just from a selfish perspective, as wanting to ensure your place in the afterlife, you'd think that you'd be doing what Jesus actually told you to do rather than the opposite. But I don't know.
Yeah, it
I'm
reminds me of
saying that as
the
someone who was a Christian for most of my life. Like even when I was a Christian, I would have been like, probably shouldn't be doing that. But
for sure. It reminds me of the GOP Jesus YouTube thing. Have you seen that?
well, no, but I'm fully aware of Republican Jesus as a concept.
Yeah, it's just how the Christian right has portrayed their actual values and how it contrasts with the communist brown short immigrant Jew who is Jesus, who is their savior and Lord. It's quite hilarious. It's the irony.
Well, Jesus in American Christianity at large, but especially from the right, has always been kind of a fake character that they just made up that bears no resemblance to whatever Jesus may have existed in real life. I mean, it's a white guy with long blonde hair, and I mean, that's who is hanging up on the walls of most of these places. That's who they think Jesus ought to be, and therefore that's what they created. That's what they
Yeah.
worship. It's not the actual person who wrote whatever in the Gospels. But I
Obi-Wan
digress.
Yahweh.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny because I don't, now that I'm not a Christian anymore, I have the kind of people that I look up to in terms of offering moral lessons and reasonable life lessons are other fictional characters like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi and all these intentionally made up characters who had profound wisdom. One of my favorite expressions of all time: "Do or do not, there is no try." Yoda, Master Yoda.
Yeah, that one's a lot better than the sacrificing the 300 penis parts to the god. I think the wisdom of Yoda trumps the wisdom of Yahweh in many cases.
Yeah. So I also have here, I don't know if you prepared this, but once I think from Don, who's in the chat, was I just wrote down social justice. So I don't know, talk more about that, or if you had any, I don't really know where you want to go with this because I didn't prepare anything.
I'm fine with talking about anything. Like, I lost my main scheduler guy; he retired, and so Don and a few other people have been filling in, trying to find some other speakers for me. So I'm just kind of just going with the flow, talk about whatever.
So you mentioned that you were basically trying to do this atheist church thing. Do you have any concerns about how that may be perceived among the religious community? Because one of the favorite attacks I find of Christians and other theists, when they want to take digs at atheism, is to compare it to a religion, which is kind of ironic in its own way. But they like to say atheism is a religion, as if that's a bad thing, in which they're admitting that what they're doing makes no sense. But they like to attack atheism by calling it a religion. So by opening an atheist church, are you not in some way validating their attack?
Absolutely,
how do you feel about that?
That is the intent. So kind of like how when the LGBT community took the word gay and it was used as a negative derogatory term, but they turned it into something that was iconic for their community, and they I forget what the term is, they adopted it. I kind of want to do the same thing with that
queer, especially. Queer used to be, from what I'm told, derogatory. I guess in certain regions of the country, I never viewed it as derogatory, but in some places they don't like that term because they think it's offensive. But most people that I've encountered in the LGBTQ plus community, they prefer the terminology queer is like a good thing, So,
but yeah, I think that's adopting,
reclaimed, I should say.
For sure. I think that reclaiming those kinds of things that were used as insults is a good way to promote advertising of your organization. So I think I want to take that insult and actually adopt it and then make it into a church, or what churches should be. So I can say, yep, we're a religion too, and ours is better than yours. We do the things that you're not doing. It's like if our church provides affordable housing and does the things that churches should be doing, we can say, hey, look at this prosperity gospel who are buying new jets while we buy apartment buildings and give them out to people who can't afford to live. Like, which one of these churches do you think is a more moral instantiation of a representation of what's good in the world? Probably not the jets.
Yeah. And I guess the word religion is sometimes taken for granted by theists, that, atheists interpret it as this negative thing, that all atheists are anti-religious. And religion really isn't the problem, as far as I'm concerned. I think many organized religions based on theism are the problem. But there's other religions that are not based on theism, like Buddhism. Right? Most people don't really seem to have a problem with that, and it's also not based on proselytizing. Those are the two, things that make it a thing of danger: proselytizing based on unreasonable ideas like supernatural deities that are, puppet masters and in control of people's lives and afterlives. Like, these are harmful ideas that shouldn't be promoted. But you can have a religion that's not about that, and it would be perfectly fine as long as it's based on reason and good things, like actually helping people move into houses.
Yeah, I think Jainism and Buddhism are the two religions that I'm modeling it most after, because they are godless religions that are more based on human nature and trying to make the world a better place, even if they are based on woo stuff like karma or whatever. They still, the values that are instantiated by those religions are still good compared to something like Christianity, which is very bigoted and judgmental towards people who disagree in any context. So I think that
Islam and Judaism,
yep,
and a lot of the others. Yeah.
Yep. So I think that religion isn't the problem. The problem is particular religions and immoral religious beliefs that are trying to be imposed on everyone else, whether you want it or not. But I think religion has been a force for good in the world overall. I think that the community building and the social structure that it has brought together is why religion is so popular in the world, because it was beneficial for societies to have this set of core beliefs that they share in such a way that it creates this community cohesion. And so from an evolutionary perspective, religion does a lot of good things. Unfortunately, there's a lot of negative things that are then tied into that, some vestigial limbs that are entailed within the community aspect, like beliefs in an all-powerful sky daddy that will send you to hell if you don't worship him. And if we can get rid of those
Yeah.
parts and keep the good parts, I think there's a lot of benefits that we can learn from religious beliefs.
Now, I was listening to the way that you explained that, and your usage of tense shifted back and forth as you were going. You said was in a few cases, and then you said is sometimes. So I'm wondering, do you think religion was beneficial in the fact that it helped build communities in the past, and therefore it was evolutionarily necessary and is not so anymore? Or do you think that it still is today, that it's still a necessary thing that we should have in society?
Well, it's kind of like asking, are spears necessary? Like, spears are more useful than our hands at hunting. And they'll always be more useful than our hands, but now we have even more useful tools. And so I think
Right.
that the same thing applies to religion, where religion is kind of like a spear. So it's useful in getting us from some kind of a pre-agrarian state of just hunter-gatherer societies to something that's more cohesive. But now we have something that's better than that. We have social services, healthcare, the NHS, like welfare. These kinds of things are far better at doing these social cohesion building things than religion are. And we can see that in the more secular nations around the world: Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Japan. They have a lot better ability to have social cohesion, less crime, less poverty, everything in every respect. And so I think that religion is a useful tool, but it's outdated, and we have better tools now.
Yeah, and when you compared it to some of the other social safety nets, is what I like to call them, I would say that you are correct in that they would be better if people focused on them. But a lot of the religious people, especially religious people on the right, don't want to focus on that. They want to take away from that and promote religion instead. It almost seems like they're so devoted to the idea of religion that that has to be the crutch that the nation falls on, and not the government providing welfare to people. They would rather people rely on the church and their, I don't know, their commandments or their tradition than actually helping people, because it's the crutch that so many of them rely on, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's that they see this idol of their religious belief as being so perfect that nothing could possibly be better than it, and so they have to use that as the solution for everything. It's the
Yeah.
when all you
Anytime
have is
they're
a head of.
promoting this idea that we live in a Christian nation. I think I heard Marjorie Taylor Greene say, she's a Christian national, which is really appropriately conflated with white nationalists today, which is a euphemism for white supremacy, as far as so whenever I hear somebody use the word nationalist, it reminds me of fascism, and the form of fascism that we see kind of trying to encroach its way into our society today, which is right-wing extremism, white nationalism. I don't think we want that as a nation. We're both Americans, I should say, in case anybody wasn't sure what nation I was talking about. But this idea that we're a Christian nation, or that we were founded by Christians, is very misleading. I mean, it depends on what context you're talking about. I mean, if by Christian nation people mean most people in America identify as Christian, well then yeah, sure, I guess. But if by Christian nation you mean a nation based on Christian law or Christian theology, no, that's like, we are the opposite of that. The First Amendment to the Constitution ensures that we cannot be a Christian nation or a Jewish nation or any of that sort of thing. So when people try to make it into that, what they're doing is basically trying to turn it into a theocracy instead of, devoting resources to things that actually help people. They think that turning it into a theocracy is helping, but you have to interrupt me because I'll just ramble on with stuff like that.
Oh, it makes my job easier. I can just let you talk, and I can just sit back and drink my coffee. I love it. But yeah, so I've directly experienced that. So even though my goal is to provide like low income housing, my parents like disown me and don't want to talk to me because it's an atheist church. It's not the Jesus church. It's not the right kind of helping people. You're not helping people with the Jesus. You're helping people with some.
Are your parents very religious still?
Yeah, they were. So I'm from Texas, Dallas, Texas. So my family is mostly far right Bible Belt individuals. So yeah, they are very religious and don't like any divergence from the Jesus faith.
Or from their interpretation of the Jesus faith, I guess.
Right.
You know,
Yep. Yep.
because I think we should be fair. Well, we don't have to be, but I choose to be fair to Christianity and recognize that there are different schools of thought in Christianity. I come from a East Coast, Northeast Coast African American family who was very into Jesus, but they're all socially liberal, very liberal. So their idea of what Jesus thought is completely different, probably from what your parents in Dallas, Texas, think Jesus was teaching. I grew up in New York, so in the 80s, and 90s, I mean, LGBTQ people were accepted, and so I grew up with that kind of as the norm. And I was a little bit jaded being from New York City because I thought the whole world was like that. And then, all it takes is driving 2 hours outside of New York City in the 80s to realize that, this is everybody's completely homophobic, until you get to San Francisco. So there was only small pockets of the country that were like accepting of gay people or this idea of transgender people back then, whereas now it's more so. But yeah, they were Christian. It was the same percentage. Still, 70% of people identifying as Christian in San Francisco or New York City or whatever. So they just have a different interpretation of Jesus. The hippie liberal, love thy neighbor Jesus, rather than the fire and brimstone judgment Jesus.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point about how moral progress also affects religious people. Because, like, even the extremists, the Bethlehem Baptist Church of today, would have been considered moderate 200-300 years ago, when literally the churches were actually killing people because they disagreed. So I think that the moral progress that we see in society, like today, the progressive Christianity, who are much more accepting of the LGBTQ community, is an example of just how the people are affected more by their culture than their religious beliefs, and that they, over time, tend to become more inclusive, even though their religious beliefs don't align with that. And they just try to read it into the text, try to make it fit the texts with whatever they can. And I think that's overall a good thing. I think it's good that they can move their religious beliefs towards a more moral view. But I think it's definitely
I have
puts
mixed
into
feelings
perspective.
about it.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about it. And actually, I was going to ask you, have you ever debated a liberal Christian, someone who identifies as a Bible-believing Christian, but from the progressive, liberal, left-wing
Yes.
point of view?
Yes.
How did you find that?
I want to say,
Yeah.
I asked them a really, really interesting question. I asked, why do you think it is that the people who are most inclusive of the progressive mentality happen to be atheists, and the people who are the least accepting of that ideology happen to be majority Christians? Doesn't that produce a conflict, cognitive dissonance in your mind? And that he said yes, he absolutely agreed to that, and it was a really interesting conversation. But yeah, I think that perspective is really interesting to see how they adopt, or how they rationalize or understand that dichotomy of the most people who are Christians tend to disagree with their interpretation, and most people who agree with the progressive interpretation happen to be atheists. And how they cope with that.
So I came from this background, and so I can put both hats on. And I think because of that, I find it more frustrating to debate them than the right-wing conservative Christians. And the reason I find it more frustrating is because the problem I have with liberal Christianity, and the kind that we both find morally more commensurate with, our values as atheists, is that it keeps religion going. It makes it into this nicer, prettier thing. It pours a coat of sugar on shit, for lack of a better word. I don't know if I can curse on here, but if not,
yes, cursing is 100% fine, totally fine.
Yeah, but it makes it kind of makes Christianity prettier than it really is, and gives people an excuse to hang on to it longer. And that's what I find frustrating about them. And I can think of all of the Bible verses that validate looking at Christianity from the more liberal perspective, but it's cherry picking in the same way that looking at it from the conservative point of view is cherry picking. It's easier to attack conservative Christianity because it's so obviously bad, and we can so obviously see how it harms society. it's harder to see in liberal Christianity. And you have to, because like I said, on the surface, they pretty much agree with us in most areas about how to treat people and all of that. The harm has to do with, the insidious nature of continuing the false belief going and continuing giving people an excuse to believe in unjustified, unreasonable propositions without evidence. That's to me the harm of it, because if people can't see the harm that it's causing, they're more likely to say, well, it's not causing any harm, so why should I give up this belief? Well, no, it's because it's still unreasonable. It's not based on any evidence. It's an unjustified belief. It's irrational. It opens you up for, being exposed to cons and everything. So it's still harmful. It's just less harmful. And because it's less harmful, it's more frustrating it's harder to convince a liberal Christian to deconvert, I think. Whereas with conservative Christians who, you can sometimes shock them into realizing that they are slavery defenders and rape apologists and will justify genocides. And especially if they've never read the Bible, you can point that stuff out to them in the Bible that you read as an atheist, which they've never opened as a devout Christian. Again,
for sure. I mean, I think I have conflicting feelings about that, because if a religious ideology was more strict and unable to be bent in a way can be reinterpreted with new values, I think that would lead to a society that was far less likely to evolve socially. It'd be much slower, kind of like the Muslim community. I think it takes much more effort and longer for them to adopt social values that like they just allowed women to drive in Saudi Arabia in the past 5 to 10 years or something. And so I think that the malleability of the ideology to incorporate new interpretations that are more moral allows society to progress faster than a more strict interpretation, even if the more strict interpretation is all or nothing and can be broken more easily. I don't think it would be better for society to have that, because I think that the more malleable.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I'm not suggesting that we ought to. Certainly, I would much rather have more liberal Christians to deal with in the world than conservative Christians, because, like I said, the conservative ones are the ones that are causing the most harm, even if they don't see it. Sometimes they just don't understand the harm that they cause, and it has to be shown or explained or reasoned to them if they're capable of that. And so, yeah, from that point of view, I totally understand where you're coming from. I don't necessarily think it is determined by religion. So, because you mentioned how difficult it is in Islam, and we see that in the Middle East, but I think, I don't know, I think it has more to do with the laws that are in their country. These are pretty much theocracies, and they're ruled by religious law. Sharia law is the law of the land in a lot of those countries. And I think Muslims who exist in secular countries like in the United States or France or the UK are more open to different interpretations. You tend to see a lot more, because different interpretations are allowed in America, So I know a lot of liberal Muslims in America as well. And I think that if we were to have a theocracy in Christianity like we did back in the day, it would be just as rigid and dogmatic as what we see in a lot of these Muslim countries. So I don't know if it's the religion itself that lends itself to not being able to have different interpretations. I think it's the society that has adopted the religion and how they've internalized the religion.
Oh, for sure. I think both play a part, because I think the religions that say death to apostasy are a little harsher, and it's harder to accept other interpretations when you're going to be killed if you disagree. And I think
that's true, but Tom, that's Judaism too. I mean, the Old Testament says that, but we don't see that in Israel, and we don't see it in New York. The two places that have the most Jewish people. Most Jewish people today don't kill people for having a different belief system, even though the Bible says that you should. They don't kill witches. They don't kill their children. They don't take slaves anymore. They have this religion, but they're not really following it. They're following the law of the land, and they've made secular laws to ensure that they can't actually do the religion, even if they wanted to. I don't think most Jewish people want to have slaves. I don't think that they think slavery is a good thing, but their book says it. So how do you get around this? Oh, well, you adopt a system of secular law that outlaws this, so that it may have been acceptable to God, or it's acceptable in society that allows it, but our society doesn't allow it. Therefore, we can't do it. So we don't have to follow this. religions, but yeah, it's in Judaism, but it is the point that I was trying to make, is in the Torah or the Tanakh rather, that you can own, so you can do all these immoral things just like it is in the Quran. In fact,
I think
the Torah may be worse than the Quran in some areas. But
oh, definitely, yeah. I think the Old Testament is far worse than the Quran in the amount of heinous things that were supposedly committed inside of it.
Yeah. And I singled out Jews a minute ago, but Christians too, I should say, because guess what Jesus said? He said, follow the commandments. So how do you be perfect? Follow all of the commandments. So yes,
every jot and tittle or whatever.
Yeah, not one jot nor tittle will be removed from the law. So I did not come to abolish, I came to fulfill. And
ironically,
and specifically, no, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say that ironically, the Jews are like the most pacifistic of the Abrahamic religions, even though their text is the most violent. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things that they do that I don't like either. I'm not a fan. All these religions are problematic in some ways or another. But I agree, of the three, they're the ones causing the least amount of harm. There's less of them as well, so their power to affect negative change is greatly reduced by their lack of numbers relative to the Christians.
Oh, I would probably disagree there. I think that while Jews have less population, they do have more power in the economy and banking, art, history. They make a quarter of all Nobel Prizes. I think they have sufficient power and technology to make more of a negative impact, or as much as Christians, maybe more than Muslims, because of their technological advancements. Specifically, Israel has enough nukes to nuke like the entire Middle East several times over. So they have the power to definitely make a huge negative impact because of their ability to influence change economically.
Yeah, they have the power. You mentioned nukes as being physically having the power, but they also know the ramifications or the repercussions of doing that, and they're an intelligent people. They're not going to do that. It's different. Israel having nukes is different from Iran having nukes, for example, because they have both the wherewithal and the knowledge and understanding and realization to know that we have nukes, but we can't use them. The purpose of nukes is mutually assured destruction. It's designed to never to. So it's kind of on paper, but of course we would never actually do it. A lot of people don't understand that about the usefulness of nuclear weapons. They're much more dangerous in the hands of rogue regimes or terrorist organizations, or countries that have their bureaucracy, like Iran.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that I guess I should also say that I'm part Jewish. I discovered Jewish. I don't know. I'm obviously an atheist, right? But I discovered that I'm like 33% Jewish. So my dad's half Jewish. That was a secret for a long time. Only discovered through ancestry DNA tests. But
would that make you a
so
quarter
speaking
Jewish,
as someone, it would make it would make me a quarter Jewish if my mom was fully black, but she's not.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Gotcha.
So I'm, like I said, I am 30% Jewish, and then like 9% some other kind of European. It's Ashkenazi Jewish, so it's Jews from like Poland and that reason, Poland, Germany, sort of thing. But I think I was saying all that to say that while I think that the Jewish society, I don't want to, it's weird when you're using the word Jewish, because who are you really talking about? Are you talking about people who are ethnically Jewish? Are you talking about people who follow the religion of Judaism? Are you talking about people who promote Zionist ideology of Israel? Jewish means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and you want to be careful when you're using it so as not to be called anti-Semitic, So obviously, like, I don't believe in race conceptually. I think it's a social construct. So, people can pretend that I'm being anti-Semitic when I say I'm against the Jewish religion, but I'm not. I'm against the religion, and some of the ideas promoted by Judaism, just like I'm against Christianity and Islam and a lot of those others.
Yeah, Yeah, so I'm on the record saying if I could pick any race of what I would like to have been born as, I would pick Ashkenazi Jew because they have the highest IQs and the most Nobel Prizes. So definitely not anti-Jewish. I'm pro-Jewish.
So now that raises the question: why do they have the highest IQs and most Nobel Prizes? Is it because is it a genetic thing that they're just the genes of this particular group lends itself to more developed brain chemistry, or is it because of some of the ideology that they've held and the beliefs that they harbor and the way that they've trained themselves in their society to pursue education as the means of escaping person? Or both?
I think it's
Or
both,
neither?
actually.
Okay.
I think it's both. I think that Steven Pinker really did a really good presentation on Ashkenazi Jewish history and showed that over the past hundreds of thousands of years, the culture has specifically sexually selected intelligence more so than other cultures, which seems to lend itself to higher IQs. He also made the argument that possibly the Holocaust could have had a contributing factor because the most intelligent Jews were the most likely ones to be spared and to escape the consequences. And so the eugenics argument that it could potentially have worked in some context to promote higher IQs in that one group of the remainder of that group. So I think there's a large number of contributing factors of sexual selection for specifically intelligence, which does give them a genetic advantage, as well as the fact that culturally they have been selecting for that due to social conditions for hundreds of thousands of years.
I'd like to see if there's any like scholarly articles, studies that have been done on this. Somebody is just asking why I'm in front of a brick wall, because it's. I think brick walls are very pretty. It took me a long time to install this brick, and it's actually a green screen, so that's why. And and somebody also said that DNA tests highly. I'm reading the comments just because DNA tests are highly suspect. They don't test everything. Yeah, it's not a foolproof thing. They tell you that, and they say we're constantly updating our results. My results have updated periodically. They haven't changed significantly though, but the percentages shift slightly as they get more information from other people who do them. I want my mom to do it, but she's scared. So
she's scared. What is she scared of?
I think a lot of Black people are scared to do it because of what it might show and about their level of Blackness, so to speak. So growing up, I heard all of my life. Both of my parents identify as Black, by the way. A lot of people think that I'm like half Black and half white, and technically I'm not. Both of my parents identify as African American, but are they Black? That's questionable because my dad obviously we've had believed our whole lives that he has the same father as siblings, but he clearly does not. His mom, white man, clearly, and she took that to the grave. That was it went to the grave because this was back in the 50s, where that was not legal everywhere. So. Religious people in the South in the 50s, interracial, that wasn't a thing. That wasn't a thing that was publicized. So that was kept secret from everybody. And I think my mom is afraid of what she may find. And I think that's fair. A lot of people don't want to think that they've been lied to or had secrets from them. So for the longest time, it was, well, you're part Native American. And which the DNA test showed no evidence of any Native American anything, by the way. But for 3 years, I was believing that I was, Cherokee, Seminole, like 5 different tribes of Native American, none of which I have. It's all white people, right? So I think that if we were to examine my mom's side of the family, you would do the same thing. So we're all mixed.
That makes sense. Yeah.
It's just a bunch of mixed people that kept getting with mixed people and calling themselves Black, which is fine because that's what they were viewed as sociologically, society, economically, and all of that. So.
Pokerman asks, DC or Marvel?
So this is tricky because my favorite character of all time, I think a lot of people know this about me, is Superman. And so that would be DC. And probably my second favorite maybe is Batman. However, on the whole, I think that Marvel has better titles. And I think they definitely have better movies if we're judging by like the MCU versus the DCU. So when it comes to movies, certainly Marvel. When it comes to comic books, I'm a Superman reader, so I'm biased. But my second favorite comic book is X-Men. I read a little bit of Batman, but I know Batman mostly from movies and cartoons. So my characters are Superman and Batman, but I love the X-Men and the Avengers too. So I'm one of those people who likes both. It kind of depends on which medium we're talking. I can't really pick. It's like asking me Star Wars or Star Trek. I can't choose. I like them both, for different reasons, but I like them both.
I hate Superman and I hate the Hulk. I think they're too overpowered. I think that it's just not, it's not a rational thing to put into a comic. Batman is perfect. He's just human with some brains. That's great. It's perfect. Lex Luthor should have been the superhero in all of those movies. Lex Luthor was great, but Superman's just way too overpowered. I can't stand him.
So I think a lot of people feel that way. That's really the number one complaint when you talk to people who are not Superman fans, is that he's too powerful. He's hard to relate to. I don't like him because he's not realistic and that sort of thing. I have a different take on that. And one of the reasons why I like Superman is the fact that he's so OP. And not necessarily someone we can relate to. Superman is more of an idea of what to live up to or what to aspire to. I don't want to say Jesus-like because that makes it into a religion. I don't worship Superman, but I do think like it's something to aspire. It's thinking about what we could be. Like if more people behaved like Superman or acted like Superman, or if they would show the same type of restraint that Superman shows with all these powers. It's kind of like that line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and I like that he could be a god who's worshipped by everybody and enforce that through his power, but he chooses not to be. He chooses to be like the beacon of hope and fight for truth, justice, and whatever the American way was back in the 30s when they came out with them. But so it was more about that to me. And the interesting thing about Superman in terms of his how to create interesting stories for him, because he's so overpowered, he can't use his power in ways that the other superheroes can, because he would kill too many innocent people, so it's more about him like preventing the city from being destroyed, or preventing Lois Lane from being killed, or preventing people from being hurt because they know who he is. And so he still has to like outthink. Like Lex Luthor is a genius and he's on Superman's level because he can like sort of outthink him in many ways, but Superman defeats Lex Luthor by outthinking the thinker, because he can't just overpower him because he'll kill too many innocent people or whatever. So I don't know. I think those kinds of stories are just as interesting as, I assume you would say that Batman is not. Are you a Batman fan?
Yeah, I like Batman, but I really like the X-Men. I like Wolverine and Magneto. The idea of having a superpower that's minimalistic, but then you can maximize it by adding some technology to it. I think that's such a cool idea, rather than just packing all of your powers into your superhero. Say he can just heal, and so because he can heal, you could add in this super hot metal across his skeleton to make him even more powerful. I think that's a super awesome, interesting idea to heighten the intellectual level of your comic. So I'm a big fan of Wolverine. Love the X-Men comics.
I love X-Men too. I love it probably for a different reason, in the fact that they're superheroes, but they're not really treated as superheroes. They're more treated as outcasts. People are afraid of them. It's a little bit more realistic in the way that it approaches the superhero genre, where they're not necessarily like worshipped as these heroic people, but people are scared of them, and they're treated like it's a great commentary for having a marginalized subclass or subculture of people in society that are treated like shit, basically, because they're different, and that's something that as someone who is African American, LGBTQ, who's experienced marginalization in a lot of different ways, I only identify with the X-Men in terms of the realistic side of it and that portrayal, so that's that's why I've always liked the X-Men.
For sure.
And you mentioned Lex Luthor should have been the hero.
Lex Luthor is awesome. He is so great. He's perfect. He's like if he was an X-Men, because lots of the X-Men have like bad personality traits where they do bad things, but they're ultimately heroes in the end. Lex Luthor could totally fit that genre perfectly. He could like use his intelligence to do bad things in order to do good things. Just change his character slightly. He'd be great. He's awesome. Lex Luthor is awesome.
Yeah. I don't know. I see a lot of parallels between Lex Luthor and Donald Trump. In fact, in some ways, I think that one was modeled after the other, but I don't know which one because they're both characters, right?
Well, Donald Trump
both
is
billionaires who became president.
Well, Elon Musk maybe, but Donald's too dumb. He can't, just too dumb.
Fair enough. That's a good point. But okay, sorry, you wanted to ask another question.
Yes. Nick Jr. asks, would you say that the modern Muslims living in the Middle East are more moderate than they were thousands of years ago? Probably yes.
It depends on the country. So the Middle East is broad. You know, there's Saudi Arabia, Iran, there's Yemen, there's North Africa, Egypt. So it probably depends on which Middle Eastern country we're talking about. Afghanistan, Iraq. And because they all have slightly different histories. I would say that, and also depends on what year. Like you said, 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, I can't really speak to that because I don't know the history of it back then. I am told by a lot of people, archaeologists, anthropologists, and people who've studied religion, that it wasn't as bad then necessarily. But that's like, what are they comparing it to? Are they comparing it to today? Are they comparing it to the 1950s? It goes through ebbs and flows. I know that 50 years ago in Egypt, for example, women had much more rights than they have now, at least as far as what was culturally accepted. Egypt, Lebanon. Lebanon is okay now, but just a lot of the Middle Eastern countries had more rights then. And then it became a little bit more and more radicalized over time, to the point where now they don't, so it depends on which country and how far back we want to go. But I think that it has not progressed, whether it's gotten better or worse. It hasn't really deviated as much as Christianity has 1,000 years ago. Christianity, you can see a clear trajectory of it changing with the society around it. Christianity was very clearly and obviously more harmful 1,000 years ago than it is today. So I don't know that Islam has followed that same trajectory. It's a younger religion as well, so it's about 800 years younger than Christianity. So maybe it will, but I think it's going to take secularism and people promoting secularism, transforming the society away from a theocracy in order to see real lasting institutional changes in the religion, because everyone's interpretation of Islam in Saudi Arabia is what the government says it is. Everyone's interpretation of Islam in Iran is what the Ayatollah says it is. Like, they don't have a choice to be more moderate. Or look at what's going on in Iran right now with the protests. They're like shooting people who protest, and the morality police, or whatever you want to call them. That's what they call them. It's what it is. It's religious. It's the theocratic government using its power to crush the will of the people. So if they think about being more moderate, they get crushed. You have to have a secular society in order for the interpretation of religion to modernize, in my opinion.
I would probably disagree. I think that even given how bad what they're doing in Iran is today, I think it would have been much worse 1,000 years ago. So if we saw the same protests that are happening now 1,000 years ago, they probably all would have been beheaded instantly. I think the number of victims would be significantly higher than they are today. And I think the same thing is true of women's rights. I think most women have more rights today than they did 1,000 years ago.
Overall, yes. And if we're comparing it to 1,000 years ago, yeah, I should say that. But I guess the point I was trying to make is that depending on the country that you're in, there were signs of progression that have been halted in recent years, and due to the rise of Islamic extremism, and so there were no doubt periods where there were advances towards progressivism, that someone got into power either through military coup or whatever and decided, nope, we're not going to do that, and then they crushed it. So it takes a society that is not ruled by religion in order for the people to start incorporating more modern ideas. And I think that we've seen glimpses of that in the past until it was crushed, and then it stopped.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that Al-Ghazali, when he was around, Islam was at the height of its power in around the 1200s, and they had an inclusive society with lots of trade between countries. They're very inclusive of allowing in Jews and other countries, cultures into trade, and they were the world leaders at that time. And then they outlawed math and outlawed trade, and it went downhill. So there were definitely times where there were progressive inklings in the culture that then got turned around due to religious zealots.
Right. And that's the danger of having a Christian nation, by the way, for our own society. That's why we don't want anyone talking like Marjorie Taylor Greene ever in power, because as soon as you turn it into a Christian theocracy, then progressivism goes downhill and people start losing rights. Women lose rights, gay people lose rights. This is now intersected with white nationalism, so Black people probably lose rights, immigrants lose rights. Everyone loses rights, even white people, even white men. The most privileged class in society ultimately loses rights, because now you can't have probably things like pornography or things like, alcohol, or they have an excuse to take away whatever rights that don't conform to what they think the religion should be.
Yeah, I think that's one of the many reasons we definitely don't want Marjorie Taylor Greene in power. I think that there's more than I could list of specifically her and Trump. Oh my God. There needs to be an IQ test. You have to have an IQ test to be in power. It has to be at least above 120.
Yeah, I think there should be an IQ test, but there should also be a where do you stand on the Constitution and freedom test, because if you think that, like Carrie Lake said that she wouldn't concede if she lost, where do you stand on democracy? And if your position, every question that should be asked to every candidate running in every national race should be, if you lose, will you concede? If they answer no, that should be disqualifying. That question should be asked at the beginning of the race, before a single vote has counted, before a single debate has been had, or the first question in the debate. If you lose, will you concede the race? No, disqualified. You are anti-American. You are against democracy. You are no longer able to lead the country in any capacity. That's what I think the test should be.
Well, the Constitution part I actually kind of disagree with, because I think even the writers of the Constitution said the Constitution should be rewritten. I think it was every 12 or 24 years or something. And so I don't think
it's a living document for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think a politician should have to agree with the Constitution to be a politician. I mean, obviously they should be willing to concede and not try to overthrow the government. That part's bad. Definitely don't do that part. But I think it's okay to disagree with the Constitution on certain parts. Like, I think a lot of people are against the Second Amendment on the left, for sure. We should probably limit
I'm one of them,
to some degree.
Yeah, I'm one of them. And I'm not against the Second Amendment. I'm against the interpretation of the Second Amendment.
Right.
But I do think that if you are anti-democracy, I think that should be exposed in the beginning, before people get to counting votes or anything like that. Like, that should be known. So I guess when I'm saying disqualifying, I mean in the eyes of the public. I think that that the public, before they cast a single vote, should recognize that the candidate being put up is against democracy and against the First Amendment. That should be made clear. I think that if you ran a candidate against the First Amendment, and if they ran on a platform against, let's throw out the First Amendment, that nobody would vote for them, or very few people would vote for them.
You would hope, but I don't know.
Do you disagree with that? You think there's a lot of people against the First Amendment?
Yeah, most of the
Okay.
religious people. Like, I think if you had a religious candidate who was saying they're going to abolish the separation between church and state and put in a Christian nation, and then
Mhm.
limit people's right of free speech of other religions, there's probably going to be a large percent of the Christians who would probably vote for them.
Yeah, but what percentage of the overall country do you think that would actually be?
Oh, that's tough. Gotta say, like, I'm saying 30-40% of the right wing Christians would definitely vote for him.
So
Probably more.
30-40% of the right wing Christians, or 30-40% of the United States electorate? Because I think I would
Um,
agree with you. 30-40% of the right wing Christians would, but that's still a small percentage of the total electorate, because most of the electorate are not, like, the majority of the electorate is not right wing Christians. I think the right wing only represents 30% or 30 or 40% of the electorate
well, of the
of the
voting
vote of the
populace,
actual
it's like
voting people.
50-50,
Yeah.
right? Because I think 50% of like people who vote are like Republican. It's pretty close. It's
It's
not like
about
it's a
it's
huge
about
difference.
it's 40+% Republican, 40+% Democrat, and then independents make up that small pie wedge of the voters, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but if you just look at the 40 something percent of Republicans, not all of them would be in favor of making it a theocracy, because a lot of people are Republicans for non-religious reasons, like
Yeah.
tax cuts rich, or, you know, they're protest, or many other reasons, you know. But they would say, like, if you pose that question to these Republicans, should America be a theocracy? They'd be like, hell no. That's because that's bad
Yeah.
for me too, you know. So I don't even think it would be the majority of them. So you've only got 40% of them plus another chunk out of the ones who wouldn't be that. You end up with like a minority, a small minority of people who would actually be in favor of taking out the First Amendment, I think. But I have no science to back that up. There probably needs to be a study or a poll, at least, where we can
For
see.
sure. A few people asked, "Are you a Freemason?"
Are they talking to me? Is
Yes.
Bryce a
Yes.
Freemason?
Yes.
No, Bryce is not. And yeah, I'm curious about why do I come off as a Freemason?
I have no
I
idea.
thought I thought all the Freemasons were white. I didn't know you
Most
could
of
be
them, I
black
know.
and be a Freemason. But
Well, I've actually been to a Freemason, like their Scottish Rite is what they call it. So they have like multiple levels. They have like the Scottish Rite is like the highest level of their temples. They actually have like a castle here in Minneapolis, and I got invited to one of their events, and so I went. Most of them are white, but I think there was like 3 or 4 African American people there. But yeah,
yeah.
so I don't know if you come off as a Freemason or not. I mean, they're mostly nice people, so I don't know. Not like
Yeah,
insulting
I'm
them.
sure they are. I'm judging based on secondhand testimony from a guy I used to work with. I used to have a supervisor when I was in the Air Force, and he thought about. He said he was approached by some Freemasons and thought about it, you know, joining. And he went out with them a couple of times, like fishing or whatever, and they start talking and asking him strange questions about that indicated to him that they were probably racist. Now, that could have just been those Freemasons. It may not say anything about Freemasonry as a whole, but he got the very strong impression that they were not into, like, other races and other ideologies and other kinds of people in the Freemasons. You know, they're okay out there, but not in here. And he felt like he was being tested on, like, his views about that before he were to join the organization. And again, it could have just been that local group, and that's really the only thing I know about them. So I can't say that they're anti-black or anything like that, because I don't know. But no, the answer to the question is I'm not a Freemason. I'm
Gotcha.
not attached to any group, any organization that I'm not attached to any organization. So
We're gonna have to get you a convert to the Church of T-Jump.
well, show me your doctrine and list of tenets, and let me know what the dues are, because one thing about religion is one thing about the godly religions is that they always need money. I think George Carlin said it best. He's all powerful, all knowing, all wise, somehow just not good with the finances, and he always needs money. So
Yep. Yep. All right. JJ asks, what are the odds for the Church of Atheism becoming a cult of T-Jump? Like, I'll give that one a 50-50. Solid 50-50.
What is the difference between a religion and a cult, in your opinion? I have my own answer, but I'm curious as to how you would answer that.
I would define a cult as specifically those that like try to isolate you from your family and get you to be subservient to authorities without consent. Those, I think, would be the differences. Where most religions, I think, are more consensual. You can be a part of it if you want to. It's not really required. You can leave if you want to. Whereas cults are much more stringent on forcing people to leave. Like Scientology, cult, 100%. Whereas like Jainism, religions, like they don't really care.
What do you think? How would you classify Jehovah's Witnesses? Because they're kind of in between. They meet some criteria and not others, because they don't try to isolate people from their family unless they try to leave, and then they do. So it's like, to me, that makes it a cult.
I don't know.
Also, something else to me that I would say is indicative of a cult is how secretive they are to outsiders. You know, most religions are generally open, like Catholicism. You can look up the tenets of Catholicism. You can go into any Catholic church and talk to a priest, and they'll tell you exactly what they believe and exactly what their done is, and here's how you become a Catholic, and here's how you get excommunicated. Whereas with cults, you don't really know what they believe until you're in it, you know, and it's not discussed with people outside of the cult, you know, or they live in a compound or something. It's very secretive, and you're not supposed to. You have to
donate $10 million and then listen to the golden tapes, and then you get to see the case will open, and you'll see the little documents that say that volcanoes got nuked.
Yeah. Have you ever heard a Mormon discuss the magic underwear, or like actually describe to you the purpose of someone who was actually a current Mormon, not some former Mormon, but anyone who is engaged in the Mormon church? Have you ever heard them openly discuss the magic underwear?
Yes. I've had several Mormons on. Kwaku L, I believe, was his name. He was on, and we talked a little bit briefly about the magic underwear. I don't remember what he said because it was a while ago, but I have had several Mormons on who did talk about the magic underwear.
The reason I asked is because I've asked a couple, and the answers that I've gotten were always very coy and shy and didn't want to talk about that. And I couldn't tell if it was just embarrassment or if it was secretive, or if I'm not a Mormon, I'm not supposed to know. I couldn't tell, you know, and so it had a culty. I got a culty sense from it, and I didn't want to call it a cult then. Yeah, I'll just leave it at
that. Don Fullman, thank you for the super chat. Could he say what his differences he has with Justin Downing?
Yeah, I'm not a pedophile.
Well, that's going to be a big one. Yeah.
No, I guess I should say the question to work with him on a YouTube channel, and then I stopped. Justin previously identified as an atheist at the time when I was hosting the EA show with him, and then he began to transition into Islam, and it was something that myself and producing time out as a Muslim yet. We'll see it happening slowly but surely. And then finally he came out as a Muslim, which surprised neither of us, but everyone else. But we weren't surprised. And but that wasn't really to go along different paths. It was the direction that to take the show, which was when I originally started. It was called the Empathetic Atheist, the EA show. That's what EA stood for, empathetic atheists, meaning we wanted to be atheists who had reasonable conversations with people of different faiths to understand what they believed and why, and see if we could find common ground. That was what I was led to believe the show was about, and that's what it was about when I was on it. But obviously him being more sympathetic to Islam and wanting to have more Muslims on, and taking the show in that direction that's not something that I was going to be cool with, and it wasn't just that he was a Muslim and I was an atheist, because that would have been fine if that's all it was, but that wasn't all it was going to be. It was going to be what he ended up doing, which was turning it into a complete
Muslim propaganda.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it turned into exactly what I thought it would turn into, and I'm glad that I disassociated myself from it before it reached that point, because that's what he wanted to do. That's what he ultimately wanted to do. And it wasn't just, the fact that it was Muslim propaganda or that he was having Muslims on board. It was the type of Muslims that he wanted. They were, because I was acquainted with a couple of them, and they are radicalized. And unfortunately, he was on the path to become radicalized, in my opinion. I can talk about this now because I don't know what the future of his show will hold, given recent legal proceedings. But I could see him going down a path of radicalization just based on his reasoning. So yeah, those are my differences with him on that level. Morally, obviously, I have a lot of other differences with him too. I think that I don't know how much more I should say. So I'll wait until another question, and then I can elaborate if someone asks me another question.
Gotcha. Tinkle Tink asks, do you believe what you read in the news?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends. I'm a skeptic, so I always have to question. I question anything that I read, but it depends on the extraordinariness of the claim, right? So I proportion my beliefs to the evidence. If it's a mundane claim in the news, then I'm probably going to be more likely to believe it at face value. If it's an extraordinary claim, then no. So whether I hear from the news or from somebody on the street or from Twitter, I'm going to exercise the same level of skepticism. But I think what this question is meant to get at is, do I trust corporate media and the stories that they gravitate towards, or political commentators? And the answer is ultimately no, I don't trust them. The news is kind of too broad of a term to mean, it almost mean anything anymore, because Fox News, for example, it has news in the title, right? That network has news in it. So a lot of people think that that's what news means, something like Fox News. But if you've ever spent any time watching Fox News, like if you watch Fox News for a period of 12 hours or 24 hours over the course of 2 days, and you understand the difference between journalism and political commentary, the majority of it is political commentary. It's right-wing political commentary. But most people don't understand the difference, Who are the personalities on Fox News? Tucker Carlson, John Hannity, Laura Ingraham. Are any of them journalists? No, not one of them. Those are the most popular shows on Fox News, but none of them are journalists. So it's not journalism. They're not even pretending that it's news. They don't use the word news in those shows. And their titles are not news reporters. They're not journalists, news reporters, anchors, or anything. That's not their titles. Their titles are hosts, political commentators, and things not affiliated with news, but because they're on a network that has news in the title, people think that that's news. So I don't take that as news. I take it as right-wing political commentary / entertainment. And I'm picking on Fox News. The same thing is true of, the so-called liberal media, MSNBC and CNN. CNN has more journalists on it, but they also have a lot of political commentary too. So it depends on what is being presented, whether it's being presented as news. And, I don't get my news from just one source. I try to validate every story through multiple sources, through different angles, to know what is and what isn't news.
Yeah,
I don't trust the corporate media though, because I watch the corporate media, but I don't believe it at face value. I watch it mostly to know what's relevant, what the relevant thing is in terms of the topic of discussion, and then I actually investigate. I prefer independent news media that's not profiting from salacious stories and from telling stories from a particular angle to protect the corporations that house the agency, which is all the ones on cable news. So hopefully I answered the question.
Winston's mom asks, have you heard of Michael Persinger's God Helmet?
I have not. Should I
think
have?
That's the one. I think that's the one where there's Richard Dawkins did a documentary on it where you put on a helmet, and if you sends an electrical signal to parts of your brain, which generates the experience that you're being watched or have an experience with a person or holy being outside of you to try and explain why people have experiences of this higher power. It's because of this part of the brain. I think that was the goal of the God helmet.
Sounds very similar to an induced delusional state.
Yeah.
That's like the description of what a delusion is. So if you're doing something to trigger the perception of seeing or hearing or feeling something that's not really there, that's like the definition of a delusion.
All right, I think that's it for the questions. It was a great having you on. It was a great conversation. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
I don't this time, only because I'm not doing any work that's really public. That, like I said, this is the first show I've been on. So first of all, thank you for having me on. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it, because I need to get my feet wet again and get back game. And it's good having experience like this to just put me at ease. But I haven't really been active. I may go back to hosting my own show, or I may just appear as guests from time to time. I may be perfectly happy with that, but I'll certainly, I think I know a lot of the people in your chat. I recognize a lot of the names, a lot of the names I don't recognize, but I'll be around. I'm around Facebook mostly. And then whenever somebody invites me on is usually when I come on. I'm not really somebody who has a lot of credentials or expertise on anything. I don't feel like I do. I feel like I'm just kind of a guy who knows some stuff, and people like the way that I talk, so they invite me on. But I'm not an expert on anything. I know a little bit here, a little bit there, kind of like a jack of all trades and master of none. So I'm happy to come on and give my perspective as Joe American, and let people, draw their own conclusions from that. But until I actually get a doctorate in something, which won't be happening because I can't afford school after I'm done with this master's degree. I'm fine to just give my opinion on things and then let people evaluate it. But next time you want to have me on to talk about something, if you do again, I don't know, probably depends on how many views you get on this one. I hope I didn't take your channel, but I'd be happy to come on again.
Sure. And if you find anybody you want to have me on to debate with on your channel, I'm open anytime. I need more scheduler people because I'm lazy and I don't want to do it myself.
Yeah. But let me just are you still debating like morality? Because I know that was like your main thing for a while, or it seemed like it was.
It's
I've
like
never
my
done
second
a
main
debate before
thing.
myself. Yeah, I've debated people, but I haven't participated in debates. No, so I've never participated like a moderate debate. It's always been like informal debates and just discussions about different views. But I don't know if I would be a good debate performer myself, just because I don't like the rigidity of it, the timing of it, the rules associated with it. I like having conversation flow organically, and I feel like debate is limiting for me. But yeah, if I can think of somebody, I'll point them in your direction or point you in their direction for sure.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Yeah, my number one thing is, does God exist? That's the thing I debate most. And then morality is what I debate with other atheists on, because that's what we disagree on. But awesome. Yeah. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.